Dr. Megan Grunert Kowalske is an associate professor and the chairperson of the Department of Chemistry at Western Michigan University. In today's episode, Megan talks to us about how to help change norms over time, the importance of role modeling, and navigating life as a titled leader in a male-dominated profession.
Hello and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Megan, thank you so much for joining us on the Communicative Leader. This is really fun to have you on as a friend, a colleague. We've kind of been walking step by step on this academic journey for a while. So again, thanks for sharing your time and your expertise. And before we really dive in, can you give us a little background about yourself and what inspired you to pursue a career in a STEM field?
Yeah. Well, how much time do we have as far as the story? But no, I'm really excited to be here because I've actually never been on a podcast before, so I feel like a celebrity almost.
And you are and listeners, you are so lucky to have Megan here with her experience. I'm telling you.
So where did my journey start? I even in middle school and high school, I always liked science. I was actually reflecting, I don't even know why this morning, that my senior year in high school, I had a research paper due for my English class, and I wrote it about telomeres and hearing. It was either cancer or spinal injury, like nerve regeneration. It was something that is unlike most topics that seniors in high school would pick, I think. And I was just kind of reflecting on oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what my teacher thought of that, right? To get this very scientific paper. But even, in high school too, my physics teacher kept suggesting or recommending me for Doctors Without Borders, all these, different programs. So I had a lot of people really encouraging an interest in science. And so when I went to undergrad, I was very health field oriented. I had originally thought about doing physical therapy school and kind of got steered into the medical school track. And so upon graduation with my bachelor's degree, I actually went to medical school for a semester. And quickly realized
I didn't know this. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I tell all my freshman chem students when I'm teaching, I tell them this story because so many of them are I need to know what I'm doing right now and have it figured out. And they're under so much stress that they haven't plotted their life. And I was like, it's okay. It's okay. So I went to medical school for a semester and realized while I was there, it just wasn't for me. For lots of reasons, it wasn't for me. And got to the point where I actually failed 2 classes, which if you fail 2 classes, you have to restart med school the next year. So there isn't any catching up. If you only fail 1, you can catch up over the summer, but you fail 2 and it's start over. And so it was a point where I had to consider for myself, do I want this enough to do this again?
Yeah.
And to pay $20,000 to go to school. And I was like, no, absolutely not. And so I started thinking, okay, what do I do now? I'd always, super high achiever, and I just flunked out of school. So it's just kind of a identity crisis. And I was just reflecting on what do I actually want to do? And I started looking at different opportunities and programs and was really drawn towards teaching. And happened to stumble upon chemical education as a track that I could do a PhD in and end up teaching at the college level. And it felt like it clicked for me. And so that's how I ended up going to grad school. And when I went to grad school, I was just going to teach at a, primarily undergraduate university. and ended up really loving research and wanting to keep that as part of my career. So when I was applying for jobs, I ended up, looking at places that had a balance of research and teaching because both of them were really important to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that. And I love that, you still became a doctor, just not an MD.
Different kind, yeah.
Yeah, different kind. And you're able to still really lean into, even in those, like that moment of the identity crisis, it was this love of science that was like, okay, how do we still, connect with this in a meaningful way and, start a livelihood with it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. And so, Megan, what are some of, so folks, I mean, will you tell us a little bit about your research and what you're doing now so that we have the context for, I think, what will come next?
Yeah, absolutely. So chemical education, I think, I say chemistry. When I say I have a PhD in chemistry, there's a lot of like terror of like, oh my God, I hated chemistry. And I always kind of soften it like, oh, but I do chemical education research. I'm trying to explore ways to make chemistry not so terrifying. But really specifically, I have, since I went to grad school, a real interest in understanding women in chemistry, and then it is expanded into other individuals from like historically excluded and marginalized groups. And so that has really gotten me into the weeds of kind of picking apart like systemic bias and institutional structure, how higher ed has functioned for a very long time, how science has functioned for a long time to privilege people who are coming from certain backgrounds and really put other folks at a disadvantage. And so that's been my research focus, and it's been really fulfilling. So, I sometimes kind of asterisk that I have, a STEM career because I'm not in a lab. Like I'm not doing wet chemistry research. I'm even now people in my department talk about different instrumentation. And I'm like, yes, I vaguely know what that does, but I'm going to have to trust you on the specifics of what's going wrong with this equipment that we have. And so it's all like social science research that's situated in STEM fields. And so I bring a bit of insider knowledge because I've been trained. I did a PhD in a chemistry department. But I also have this perspective of someone who understands social research and how that looks really different from scientific research.
Yeah, you just bring this really unique and essential perspective to this intersection of, like you're saying, social sciences and hard sciences and inclusion. When we think of inclusion, of course, we have to think about exclusion and gatekeeping and how things are changing. So again, so listeners, I mean, Megan really is the perfect person to share her expertise with us in this area. And so that kind of tees us up for this next question. So what are some of these unique challenges that you faced in this male-dominated field?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think it always kind of blows my mind when I talk to women who are in the field or students and are like, oh, there isn't an issue with women. Like, look at how many women are around here. There's more women in this class than men. And, I've talked with my students a lot about, we get so enculturated with what it's like that we don't see it anymore. It's just part of how we exist. And, science and graduate school really works to kind of enculturate people and assimilate people. And so they have this, disciplinary set of norms, and people are just expected to mold themselves to fit those. And that's where, some of my research really started drawing out how women, especially, had values that were not aligned with like higher education research. And this sense of disconnect because I feel like I shouldn't be here. And so when I came into my role, I was coming straight off of a doctoral degree, looking at this disconnect. And I'm like, I need to embody all the things that women are looking for in, a role model in science. And that's really exhausting because, some of it wasn't really me. I mean, some of it was,
Mhm.
so in my career, I've had 3 children while I have been a professor. And so I've gotten plenty of comments about, my vacation. Maternity leave is not a vacation, right? I mean,
Oh,
anyone
no.
who's had a child,
No. Yeah,
will
exactly.
attest, a lot of it is subtle, right? And I think that's the hard
Mhm.
part is that if you're not looking for it, it's easy to overlook it.
Mhm.
It needs to get called out so that people who are making these comments notice.
Mhm.
But even one of the stories I've told people about one of my chairs when I was relatively new, he would always refer to me as young lady in department.
Oh. Oh.
And
Oh.
everyone
The
else
worst.
was Dr. So-and-so.
Mhm.
Right. And so I was already quite
Mhm.
young. I mean, I was the youngest person in the department,
Mhm.
one of just a few women in the department. And like, he was like just calling it out every single time. Like, could you draw more
Oh.
attention to the fact
Mhm.
that I'm young and I'm a woman? Thank you.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
there's that. And then, I've had a really challenging, tenure experience, and I'm actually going through promotion this year, and it's kind of rearing its head again. And it's, again, no one is writing or giving me feedback that's like,
Mhm.
oh, we think you're not good enough because you're a woman, right?
Mhm.
It's not overt sexism. It
Yep.
is
Yep.
subtle. It is the
Mhm.
research topics I have chosen are not rigorous enough. The journals
Mhm.
I publish in aren't high enough, ranked, or the tier isn't good enough.
Mhm.
Even publishing in journals, when you send it to some of these high tier journals, they're like, this isn't a good fit,
Mhm.
which is a valid statement. And so
Mhm.
I'm going to journals that are a good fit and then getting called out on it by one of my departments. And, it's just,
Mhm.
again, I think if you aren't looking for it, it's easy to say like, well, those are valid comments.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
journals aren't that great.
Mhm.
Or they're not as good as they could be. And to internalize that rather than turning around and questioning the system, right? Well,
Yep.
maybe these journals aren't as widely read because it's a small group of people that are doing research
Mhm.
like this.
Yep.
That it's a topic that isn't valued
Mhm.
by the discipline at large, partially because it challenges a lot of these structures
Exactly.
that we've really held on to for a long time.
Yep. Yep. And the structures that I imagine those who are leading many of these top tier journals have been privileged by and rewarded within. And so, of course, I mean, so you're exactly, you're right. Some of this is very clear. Being called young lady in a faculty
Right.
meeting. I remember being, when I first started, I had one colleague who would always call me lovely.
Oh,
And I was like, this is, and I could tell it was meant in as a kindness. And another colleague who kept thinking I was a student and being like, you shouldn't be in this office. I'm like, no, literally, that's my name on the door. Like,
right.
so some of those things you're like, this is clearly not okay. Can anyone else see this? Because there are times you feel really isolated. But you're right, it's all of those ones that are subtle, where again, how was that vacation? Did you enjoy your time away? Like, I just produced a little human, and
Right.
I'm not sleeping, and my mind isn't what I want it to be, and all of these things. And you're like, there's no way this is should be packaged in with the word vacation in any sense. So yeah. So you're right. I'm really glad that you pulled out the fact that for a lot of people, and I think too for a lot of young females, I'm noticing saying like, it's fine. Look how many women, and it's like, yes, there is a change, but we can't stop. This is not, the one criterion that we're using to say, yep, we did it.
Right.
We have made this a more equal space.
Yeah.
So
Well,
with those experiences, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there's one other instance when you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about being, kind of
Mm-hmm.
young and new, especially in academics, right? You're pre-tenure and pretty
Yep.
powerless. You're trying to not
Mm-hmm.
make anybody
Yeah.
angry. And maybe I missed that memo, but we had an email that came out from my director at the time asking just the women in the department to serve on a committee about gender equity. And I mean, I was like, maybe my second or third year, and I wrote back and called him out on equity isn't just a women's issue.
Yeah.
You should be including everyone. You're
Yeah.
adding additional service for the women in the department who already have this, higher service load. Having men at the table makes it more legitimate. He was not happy that I called him out on it. And I think that's one of the challenges too, is it's risky, especially if you're young, to draw attention to that. And so a lot of people just let it go, rightfully so, right? It's not always worth it to put yourself in that vulnerable position. And then it just perpetuates.
Exactly. You're right. Especially as a junior colleague, you don't have the armor of tenure. And so, but then it's so problematic because when we have tenure in 6 years, we have implicitly been okay with these messages and these committees to get to the space. And then it feels really hard for everyone. So they're like, well, you didn't say anything. Well, I couldn't say anything. It's like,
Yes.
oh gosh, talk, rock in a hard space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for this next question, you kind of already addressed this in that story you just shared about writing back to the chair about a female-only gender equity committee. I can't even get through saying that without laughing those words together. It feels like I'm setting up a really bad joke, honestly, I say that. But I'm wondering how you've used your leadership skills. And this can either be as a titled leader now or before, as you're saying, and just saying, hey, I'm going to speak up. But what are some of the ways, or what would you recommend in terms of using leadership skills to navigate and be successful in a STEM field?
Yeah, so leadership skills. I would often not say oh, that's a leadership skill. That's just doing what you should do. I remember being startled when there was a faculty meeting and one of the faculty swore at the other faculty member and everyone just sat around and nobody noticed. And I was like, hey, that's really inappropriate. And again, I was the only one. And so to me, that's not necessarily leadership.
Oh, I'm going to stop you. That is fully leadership. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
but more
I
of
love
this
it.
kind of leading by example or being willing to call it out. And as a title leader now, as the chair, I think a lot about culture of the department more than leadership necessarily. Having this culture of we care about each other, we support each other, and we don't all need to be best friends. But rather than adversarial, it felt adversarial when I first started. And it was really important to me that we didn't have that continue. We had more of a supportive, collaborative, collegial. I mean, collegial feels like the base here.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that should be a bare minimum. Right. But a lot of times we have to work to get there, which is sad, but essential. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's things like that. I do silly things when we start department meetings, just asking a question, almost like an icebreaker question. So last fall, what's your favorite holiday tradition? And I think it was November. So I was it really can be any sort of November, December, January holiday. And people, they share stuff and you get to know each other a little bit better. And I don't think that I would say oh, that's leadership. But it is kind of embedding that culture of getting to know each other, even though we've worked together for a long time. sharing experiences, sharing stories, in a really low stakes way. Yeah. And so like that kind of thing, I don't know if it's leadership, but it's important to me to do as a leader. And having those personal relationships so that people feel that they can come and talk to me. Because that's something I think that's really toxic is if your leader isn't approachable, then there's the back channel, right? Nobody's going to actually tell me there's a problem. They're all going to, talk about it, gossip about it themselves. And I'm going to be left in the dark. And so, having those check-ins, having those relationships is important. And then in terms of culture too, one of the things that I did as a, I don't know what year I was, second year chair, was to go on maternity leave, which was not the plan at all. I had actually said when I was taking on the chair role, like, well, this means we're done at 2 kids because I don't know how I would do this. And my partner, my husband said to me, would you allow anybody in your department to tell you that? Like, I can't, if I do this, then I can't have a child. And I was like, well, no, obviously. And he's like, okay, that's your answer. And so being able to like say, yep, this is happening. I'm going on maternity leave. This is the plan. Everything is going to be okay. That set the stage, I think, for one of our junior faculty. He actually wanted to take paternity leave last semester. And I was like, absolutely. Yep, let's make it happen. Because to me, like, that's actually a really critical part of changing a lot of the culture and the values is that men need to be requesting time off when they have a child. They need to be comfortable, like, owning that space so that it's not just a women thing, right? It's not, oh, I'm going to stop my tenure clock, to have a baby. And then you have people saying like, oh, well, you've got an extra year. No, that's not how it works. And so that normalization that like everybody is going to do this and it's not just for women, that makes it better for everybody.
Exactly. Sure. It is a family thing. It is not just a woman thing. And I love that you demonstrate through the power of role modeling, as you're saying. Like, okay, is this necessarily what I thought or planned? Nope, but we're going to do it and we're going to show that we can figure this out. And I think that goes a long way. As you're indicating, it goes a long way in changing that culture. Because if our titled leader is doing this and showing that this is the right thing to do, that this is an option, then it becomes so much easier for other people to follow your lead. Yeah, very cool. And so you've kind of touched on this. My next question is thinking about how to advocate for ourselves or other women in STEM. And you've talked about this, and I love that you've also kind of brought in, it's not only a woman thing, that some of this changing these norms can be men, making decisions that weren't traditional or other, historically coach others in terms of how to best advocate for yourself.
That is a really hard question for me because I don't always feel like I advocate for myself well. I think I'm like a lot of women who say yes to everything, right? Like,
I hear
yes,
you.
absolutely, I'll do that. That's important. I will help out. And as a leader, delegating has been hard, but necessary. And that's kind of my way of advocating sometimes for myself and my time, to say like, you know what, I need somebody else to do this. I don't have the space. I don't have the time. It's just not going to happen. And some of it is, I think, probably more boundary setting than advocating. I really, really try to not be on email evenings and weekends. Whatever. I check it, but I don't respond. I take time off. And I encourage other people to take time off. Like if we're coming up to a regularly scheduled break, like winter break or spring break, I make a point of saying, like, I want you all to take some time off. Scientists are notorious for like, oh, there's a break. Now I can be in the lab, every minute of the day. And advocating for them, but also their grad students, right? This is not a time for your grad students to be in the lab 80 hours a week either. They also need a break.
Yeah, they get a break.
And so like stuff like that, it doesn't necessarily feel like advocacy, but it does feel like stuff that doesn't get spoken about, that should get spoken about. It shouldn't be unusual to be like, take a break, please.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And actually, you were the one who helped me with better boundaries, because I remember I was actually at your house and on my phone trying to respond to student emails, and you're like, and you didn't say, hey, maybe you don't want to do that. You just said, oh, it's after 5. I don't respond then. And I mean, it was like, like head blown. We were new assistants, and I was like, wow. Like, it was so freeing for me to hear someone. I felt like I needed the permission. And I was like, she's right. And then it was really helpful too, because I worked in industry before, and I'm like, no one would expect me to respond after. Right. And if I kept doing it, they'd be like, what's going on? Like, do you need some extra resources? Like, how can we help you? It would be a warning sign.
Yeah.
But in academic, it was just like, of course I'm going to respond. And now I don't. And actually times when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, no, Megan, like I really truly think of you, and it really helped to give me more work-life balance. So thank you.
That's good. Oh, you're welcome. I mean, I get emails from colleagues at 3 a.m, and my first thought is like, why are you emailing me at 3 a.m? And it's not urgent, like it's not time sensitive. And I want to just reply back and be like, go to sleep, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Go to sleep.
Yeah. That's and you're like, we do important work, but not this important.
Exactly.
We don't need to solve the world's problems at this moment. So one, I skipped over this question on accident, and it was such a nice connection to thinking about leadership skills. But it does tie into what we were just thinking about, boundaries. So, work-life balance, hot topic, very tricky one. And I think one that feels especially challenging as a woman and a mother. And I know demands in a STEM field can be different than other fields. So I'm wondering either tips you've had or what your experience has been in this regard.
Yeah. And so, I'll address the differences in STEM, fully owning that is not something that I deal with on a daily basis. But, it is a real thing that sometimes you have to be in the lab for 12 hours while you're running an experiment. There are times that, you can't leave at 5 o'clock and that's a real thing. And I get that. I usually ask that people, try and balance it out another time, right? If you're stuck in the lab until 9 a.m. or 9 p.m., hopefully not 9 a.m., but like 9 p.m., maybe leave early the next day or something. For me personally, I have talked about this with my partner who's also in a leadership position, but he says he does a good job of being able to pay attention to both at the same time, like work and kids and home life. I like a really clear division of church and state, if you will. If I'm with the kids, I don't want to be checking email. I don't want to know what's going on at work because it just raises my stress level. And then, they're asking for attention and I'm like, no, I'm just trying to finish this one thing. And I'm just like, I'm not a good person. I'm not a good parent then. And so I try to do my work at work, do the kids and home at home, and keep it separated. And that goes along with the no nights and weekends for, work, unless I'm under some sort of deadline or time crunch. But that kind of demarcation between where I'm at and what I'm doing helps a lot. I'll say that my administrative assistant in my department, the first vacation I went on when she was working with me, she was like, "You're the first chair I know that didn't take their laptop with them." I was like, "No, I'm on vacation. Like, I'm actually taking paid time off.
Yeah.
I have my phone.
100%.
But like,
Yep.
and like, but that's the culture, right? That's the culture is like, I
Mm-hmm.
can't possibly be away from my work. I'm so important that I need to be available at all times. No, I'm actually not. Right? Like, there's really very little I do that someone else can't do, or that can't wait the week until I'm back.
Yeah.
And so like, that's just a boundary.
Yeah, that is. And it, again, back to your modeling this behavior that's so healthy and so important. And that goes such a long way, especially now as this titled leader. Sure, it's one thing if you're going for a work conference and the family's coming too, which can be really challenging in itself. But when you're taking a true vacation, of course, like vacation for me is not responding to student emails or working on my revision for a paper. That's work. And so when I'm taking time away, I would like to take away time from that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think on this topic of like boundaries and advocating, one of my big challenges like within the workspace is prioritizing time for my own work. It's really easy for me to get sucked into doing chair stuff, reviewing student work or giving students feedback, working on research papers with graduate students, like all of that is easy for me to prioritize. It's much harder for me to make that space and that time for like my own research projects. I'm definitely one of those, like, in service of others is my thing. Like, if I'm going to help you, I will absolutely drop everything and do it. If it's for myself, maybe in 3 weeks.
Yeah. It'll get done when it gets done. Yeah, exactly. I know. It's this in my mind. It's always this game of Tetris that is constantly ongoing, and I don't know if there's ever a winner. A lot of times I feel like the loser or I'm behind and catching up, but it's always just figuring out how do we get this to work.
Yeah, I do a lot of triage. Like, what is the next most important thing, or the thing that's going to fall apart the soonest, or the next deadline? And that's probably not the best way to prioritize. So don't take that advice. But I mean, that's how my life functions right now.
Yes, I fully understand. I think I was just talking to a friend the other day, and I think you'll appreciate this because we have young kids, but we're at an age and we have this expertise and this knowledge where people are asking more of us, and these two things don't align, and they're really challenging. And I actually realized I use the phrase, the wheels are coming off, so often that I heard one of my kids say it like, "Oh no, Dad, I think the wheels are coming off." And I was like, okay. It was so funny, but also it was one of those moments you're like, I need to think about what I'm modeling. What am I saying here? And like having them live in a state of triage with me. I'm like, nope, this is not what I want for you. But it's those times when you just say, okay, got to take a step back. What do I learn here? How do we adjust? How do we course correct?
Right. Exactly.
So we've kind of chatted about this next question, and you've already given so many great tips, but I'm wondering, advice for other women who are aspiring, particularly for titled leadership roles in STEM. So what do you wish you knew, or, knowing now, at this experience, what would you offer others?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning curve, well, there's two. One is just all of the stuff, the new systems, the new procedures. I liken a lot to when you went from being in grad school to being a professor, where you're like, whoa, nobody taught me all of this stuff. So there's like a whole learning curve about running the departmental budget and approving travel authorizations, all these like university systems, doing payroll every other week. And those things, like, you can learn on the fly from other folks, from your administrative assistant, et cetera. Like, that's learnable. I think the thing that I have invested a lot in, and I am very glad that I did, was like structured leadership training. I think most of my life I had kind of been like, a natural leader, without really knowing why or how, and getting put into some, challenging situations. You're like, I need some new strategies. And so I think one of like the hardest things is getting people to do stuff they don't want to do. Especially if you are working with full professors who are tenured, like they're not striving for a promotion. I have virtually no carrots or sticks at my disposal. I'm sort of relying on goodwill sometimes, or like that they already think it's something that they should be doing. And so, having training, having other chairs to talk to, is really helpful in kind of thinking creatively about what are some solutions, or approaches that I haven't thought about already. And I would say, finding other chairs that you can connect with is really important. I find leadership roles can often be really isolating and lonely. And I struggle with that myself because, when I was faculty in the department, I was on like a level playing field with everybody, and we could talk about whatever we wanted to talk about. And now that I'm in a leadership role, there's some stuff I can talk with them about, and some stuff that I've specifically been said, please don't share this with your department yet, or it's about another faculty member and I can't talk to anybody about it because it's unethical. And so finding other chairs that, you can talk to and bounce ideas off of, or just commiserate, has been helpful. And so I think if someone is looking at going into that leadership role, especially the higher up you get, you might have to outsource to other universities, but getting some sort of network. And so I really strongly suggest checking out like some of these more like regional or national leadership conferences or training options, just because it helps you get connected outside of your own institution, which can be really helpful.
Yeah, because that social support, I mean, it's always so important, but you're right. When you're in a position where there's stuff ethically you can't share, or maybe even legally you can't share, when you're feeling like an island, but you've got the weight of the department or the team on your shoulders, I mean, that is a challenging position to be in. Thank you for pointing that out. So this next question, so I'm wondering, the question is, how do we attract and retain more women in STEM? And thinking about your research and thinking about the science field, the hard science field that you're situated within, I think this question might also be bringing in underrepresented groups, other people who have maybe felt excluded for a variety of reasons. So maybe drawing from your research, so how do we attract and retain other individuals into these STEM fields?
Yeah, I think, my research pretty clearly points to a mismatch between the values that, I won't even say just women and, people from historically excluded groups, but even some men are having, like this idea that I'm supposed to be devoted to science all of the time. I should think about science all of the time. I think a lot of people are, they're broader and they're more interested in things outside of science, and looking at that culture, it's kind of like, well, I don't want that. And there's also a very, especially if you're going into a high research type of environment, this expectation that you are kind of solely devoted to science. You're getting grants, you're going after publications. Going back to my story earlier, you care about where your papers are going and, what the prestige of them is. And that's a really stressful, difficult space to be in. And I think more and more, generationally, we're also seeing people have a shift towards like, I don't want my job to be the only thing I care about and think about. And I think maybe like women were a little ahead in thinking about that, because of the cultural expectation that they're supposed to, be a mom and take care of the home and, support their partner's career and, all of these really, outdated gender heteronormative expectations that we have. We're starting to get some pushback on that, and to say, I don't actually want that. That's not how I want to live my life. And I think as we can start talking about those and challenging those within institutions, we're going to start hopefully moving that needle. I think there's still a really long way to go. But putting structures in place and making things systemic can be really helpful in breaking down some of those barriers, rather than forcing each person to fight for themselves. And I'll give the example, when I had my first child, I got one set of information from HR, and then I went back with the information they give me, and they're like, oh no, you can't do that. My chair at the time had no idea what was going on. So I was getting this runaround. That was actually at a time when, and you can relate to this, the university had no maternity leave policy on the books, nothing at all.
I remember that.
So great. And you're like, what decade are we in? What century are we in?
100%.
And so we've made a lot of progress since then. Still got a ways to go, but there is a maternity leave policy. And now when I had a faculty member come in and say, this is what I want to do, yes, absolutely, I can help you with that. Even I've had 2 different faculty members this year need to take FMLA for personal reasons that are not related to having a child. And, being able to be that advocate, being able to say, yes, this is a valid reason to take a leave of absence, and I will help you navigate that.
Yes.
I think setting that as something that's accessible and supported goes so far in showing, other students, whether they're undergrads or grad students, that it is possible. Certainly the existence of people doing things that they aspire to, whether it's family or, hobbies or sports, plus their career, that certainly helps. But, making it accepted to have things outside of work, making it, publicly known that I don't actually do email on nights and weekends. During COVID, I actually had an auto reply on my email during one especially horrendous portion where we literally were just cycling through daycare closures and school closures and trying to hunt down COVID tests. And, I had multiple people tell me how much they appreciated that I had this auto reply that was my life is a dumpster fire.
The world's on fire.
To just throw it out there. I'm not ignoring you. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and my job isn't the top of my list. And so I think, having that shift happen, it's slow, but we're getting there. I hope.
Yes, I think you're right. That those conversations that normalize it, and I do remember our conversations again with our first, who are very close, and being like, "What did you learn?" Well, this is what I heard, and then we had such different information. I remember being told if you have a child during the academic year, you have to pay $6,000 to pay out adjuncts to take over the class, but then HR was like, "No, that's not how it works." And then someone was like, well, it's up to your director. And we're being like, how is this possible? How are we? What is going on here?
That's
and
then, it's a miracle anyone has had children in this job.
Exactly.
Right? Or more than one child, because once they've done it once, they're like, I'm never doing that again. Right?
Yeah. That was wild. So I like that idea of thinking of the scaffolding and figuring out how do we set this up to allow others to be successful, to navigate this in a shared and clear way.
Well, and over and over, I'm always talking about being explicit, whether we're doing grad student reviews, Whether we're talking about, family leave policies, workload, whatever it is, like being explicit and clear. If our faculty want to put some grad student on, continue with reservations, I'm sitting there hounding, what are the reservations? How do they address them? Like specific bullet points. They need to know how to meet that. And like, I get looked at sometimes like, wow, you're being really picky, but that's the key, right? Otherwise, this poor grad student gets this letter and they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah. And you're like, is it picky or am I just being clear? Am I just being helpful here? Right? Like, because you're right. And then I think that goes back to the system where people for a long time, if we're thinking of power, if a faculty member didn't like it, I'm like, it's just not working. Or they're not motivated, they're not doing enough. Well, let's make that clear. And then it's forcing people then to have to articulate, what exactly do I mean? And then, it's all, like you said, incremental, gradual changes.
Right.
To get us in the direction where we would like to go.
Yeah. If you're doing reviews and you can't be clear, it gives you the opportunity to get away with stuff later, right? But if it's like, whether it's tenure or grad student reviews, if it is clearly articulated, you got to get held to that then. And if they need those, then it's okay. And like going back very, very beginning, like that's one of the challenges with, I think, tenure at so many places is it's not clearly articulated. Even my review process this year, I was explaining, again, my husband is not an academic, but explaining like, well, there's these 5 adjectives. And if you have this combination of adjectives, then you can get promoted. And he just looked at me like, what is wrong?
Yeah, like, let me show you the contract.
He's like, well, this is what's wrong with academia, actually. I'm like, well, yes, that is true. What in the world is satisfactory?
Yeah, it feels like a bad game of bingo, right? Like, I need to get these ones in alignment or this promotion won't happen, even though I've done all the things for over a decade.
Yep. These are vague and unclear.
Yeah. If you're not in academics, we're literally not joking. This truly is the process and the criteria used for assessment. So.
Any actual expert in assessment would probably die a slow and painful death looking at how we evaluate and assess criteria for tenure.
Yes. Yeah. So I had a few other questions, but we have touched on mentoring and support and changes in the field. So I want to skip to our 2 final questions. And this is something on every episode of the Communicative Leader. I like to leave listeners with these pragmatic leadership or communication tips. It can be advice, it can be a challenge. So first part of the question, what advice or challenge do you want to leave our titled leaders with?
I think the challenge I would offer is to assume you're not right. I fall into this trap all the time, right? Like I come in, I have an agenda, there's something I want to accomplish, and I'm like, how do I get everybody on board? And it's a challenge for me to step back. And I mean, these are all really smart people. They're all very capable to step back and like let them solve the problem themselves. And this actually just happened like a week ago. I had presented a problem. I let the undergrad studies committee handle it. I didn't go to the meeting. I didn't babysit them, and they came up with a solution I hadn't even thought about. And I was like, oh, this is great. But I had a goal in mind, and it would have been really easy for me to like steamroll and just be like, make it happen. But that's not actually the kind of leader I want to be. And so this challenge to like, let them solve it. I don't have the only solution. I want to see what ideas other people bring to the table, has been challenging and powerful. So that's the challenge I would provide other folks to, especially if they're like me, let go of the controls, and see what other ideas come up when you turn the reins over to others.
Yeah, and I love that. That made me think of when you were talking about delegating too. And I was thinking then, what a gift it is, especially when it's a leader, someone in a power position that I admire, when they tap me to say, could you help with this? Or what are your thoughts on this? That's really exciting for me. And I think that's something that we tend to forget, again, as high achievers, as people who are very capable, used to having so much on your plate, that taking the step back to feel, who could do this? What could they do? That can be really challenging, but it's also empowering to them. And like you're pointing out, there might be things that they bring up that never would have crossed our minds.
Right.
Yeah, I love that suggestion, that challenge. And the last question, so advice, what do you want to leave employees, all ranks across industries? What do you want to leave them with?
I'll probably go back to my, explicit, whatever it is, the communication piece. I'm sure you can attest. It's just so powerful. Like, I try to keep my door open all the time, if I'm in my office, unless I'm actually in a meeting, because I want people to feel like they can just drop in and, talk to me about whatever. Now, sometimes that results in a 45-minute conversation. But it's just so powerful to have those relationships and that communication, to know that people can come to me and I will listen. I don't always have to agree, but I will listen, I will advocate, I will support, whatever they need from me. And that goes for students who are complaining about a classroom all the way up to, coworkers and colleagues that are having an issue that they need me to fix. And so, I know it can be intimidating a lot of times to come to a leader, and I have that challenge. Like if I'm going to text my my dean, which I don't, I'm always like, oh my gosh, like I feel so bad texting her. When I tell people, like, you can text me, like if it's something that's urgent and you need to get a hold of me, like that's why you have my phone number. But trying to break down those barriers and open lines of communication so that I actually know what's going on, and that we're having these clear, open communication channels, is so critical for leaders and for, everyone else.
Yeah, right. So you think about all of the times that we have a question, if we don't ask it, a lot of times we're working from assumptions. Many times those are inaccurate assumptions because we didn't ask the question. So I am, again, I'm so biased toward communication. But when we are focusing on communication, work is easier, relationships are easier, homes, everything gets easier when we have that focus. So so Megan, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise. This has been just so much fun. I always learn from you. I know that our listeners are going to walk away with so many important tips and things to think about as they continue to navigate, whether they go into STEM or across any other industry.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.